Hi, and welcome to the Literary Sipper. I'm your host, Amber Vitti Hill, and today we're going to be talking about resetting for fall in terms of your reading life. But before we get into that, I wanted to let you guys know that this Friday, which is going to be September 13th, I have been invited to be a guest on a podcast called The Milk Minute, which is run by one of my former students, Maureen Farrell, and her friend and cohort, Heather O'Neill. And on that podcast, we will be discussing why, even in the throes of young motherhood, it's important to maintain a creative practice for yourself so that you can feel more like yourself and never lose sight of the fact that you matter in the world and your creativity matters. So I hope you'll tune in and leave a review or leave a comment so we know you're there. And to any of my former students out there who want to reach out, I would love to hear what you're up to, because this was such a treat for me to see how Maureen has grown as a human being in the world and why her voice was important then when she was 16 and 17 and why it's even more important now. And to all the teachers out there, just remember that cultivating young people's voices in the world leads to good things. So today we're going to talk about books, and I released my fall reading guide this week, so hopefully some of you have checked that out, and we'll check out some of the books there. Some of them I have read and loved, and some of them are new to me, so we'll see how they pan out, but they sound interesting, and maybe we'll have some good discussions about it. But it's this idea right now that can happen when you start to see Halloween things and even Christmas things in the stores already, and you start to think 2024 is over. And it's not over. You have 4 months to finish any goal that you set for yourself in January. And for me, September 1 is actually the new year, because as a former student, or as a former teacher and an ever long student of life, I always feel that September 1 is a more viable new year for me. And it allows me a reset. So I do some goal setting on January 1st, and it's a good time to revisit those goals and see how they might come to fruition. And I have lots of reading goals every year, and some are easier to attain than others. And so I thought I would kind of encourage you to double down on your reading resolve and look at those resolutions you made for yourself, whether it was to read more books or a certain kind of book or finish a classic, whatever it was, and use these next 4 months to do that, to really make a push to finish out the year strong in your reading goals so that you can set new ones in January that may be a little more realistic or maybe push you out of your comfort zone, whatever it is that you were able to achieve. As long as you're reading, I'm happy. And so when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about my own promises that I made myself in January. And for me, it's usually a certain number of books. So for example, it was turning the year 2024, so I wanted to read 24 and 24. And I definitely did that this year, and with the help of audiobooks and also ebooks. I'm not a huge e-reader at all. I love bookstores, and I love owning copies of books, and I love the feeling of reading paperback, hardcover, whatever. But having an ebook on my phone has stopped me from doom scrolling instead, while I'm waiting for kids at practices or in the park. And it's been a great way to sort of keep up with a book that I might not have picked up otherwise, because I rely on Libby for my ebooks and my audiobooks. And so I look at their popular list and go from there. So I tend to lean toward literary fiction heavily, poetry heavily. So that's where I tend to read the more popular novels. And I've even read some romantasy and romance this year, which I don't typically do, and can't say that I'm going to read more in the future unless it was highly recommended by one of you and __ you have to read this. But it is a way for me to keep up with what's popular and why, and ask myself questions about why, and really look at the reading life of people in the 21st century, which fascinates me. So other things that Other kinds of resolutions people make are certain number of minutes a day, or reading with their morning coffee, or promising to post about your books. Maybe you do a monthly post, this is what I read this month, or maybe you have a Goodreads account that people can subscribe to, and you promised yourself you're going to post on there and share this experience with others. Maybe you thought you'd start a book club, or you'd attend a book club more regularly. Maybe you wanted to declutter books. That's a huge one. And we talked about it last week in our podcast on decluttering books. So if you haven't listened to episode 38, I encourage you to do that. Maybe you wanted to do a deep dive into an author, select an author with a heavy backlist and just go back and read their first book or their third book before you dive into their most current read. You might want to read more nonfiction or more short stories or more poetry. Maybe that was your resolution. Maybe you wanted to read works in translation or indigenous authors, or diversify the voices that are on your bookshelf. That is also a wonderful goal. And these are all wonderful ways to expand your reading life, to make sure your reading life is part of your daily life. That's an essential. I'm very weirded out by people who say they don't read. I think we're reading all the time now. We ingest content, but the act of reading and sort of silencing the self that's so busy during the day, the monkey mind, and the self that's telling you to do all the things and be all the people and comparing yourself constantly. What reading a book, a long form, whether it be a book of short stories or poems or a book, a novel or nonfiction, it allows you to silence that self and can function as a meditation, as well as inspiring curiosity, as well as expanding your knowledge. And I encourage you to take advantage of that. It is an important way to get centered for a lot of us, and it is important to sort of model that knowledge is essential to a well-lived life. And at this point, as we're recording September 10th on a Tuesday, it can feel, now the kids have started school, it can feel like Halloween's right around the corner, and Home Goods and Target are telling us Christmas is right around the corner. And it can feel like we're going to blink and the whole thing's going to be over. And we're going to be talking about our 2025 goals. But stay in the moment. And that's what reading will help you to do, is stay in the moment, stay here in September. And let's talk about how you can reignite your reading. So if your goal is to have a certain number of books and you're nowhere near that number, I really encourage you to give audiobooks and ebooks a try. It has increased the number for me in a way that I didn't expect. I can get through an audiobook really, really fast because I'm in the car so much, shuffling kids here and there. But maybe you have a commute on the subway. Maybe you take your daily walk. And instead of listening to a podcast, except for this one, of course, but try an audiobook. And Libby is great. You hook it up to your public library card. They're free. Of course, people have subscriptions to Audible through their Amazon account. And there are other ways to get a hold of audiobooks. And ebooks are the same. They can be free through your library checkout system. Libby's a great app because it just automatically hooks you up to whatever public library you have a card with. But it also gives you a lot of title recommendations and has a great filtering system. So I really do recommend that. Maybe you are trying to read for a certain number of minutes a day, like we were talking about. Is it literally in your calendar? Is it an alarm on your phone? Is it part of your plan for the day? And can you pair it with something you're already doing? And this is what I mean. Like if you're scrolling first thing in the morning with your coffee, maybe you bring your book down to breakfast and you sit with your book for whatever number of minutes feels right to you. 5, 10, 15, 20. It doesn't matter to me. Maybe it's just reading a chapter. Whatever works for you is going to be the best thing. That's the only thing you're going to keep doing. What works for me isn't what you're going to keep doing. You have to figure out what works for you. But pairing is kind of one of those scientifically proven habit-forming ways to get more of whatever it is you want in your life, is pairing it with something else. So for me, I don't ever have a hard time reading or being asked to read. But for me, like running, going on my run, it has to be paired with something else. And so I generally run after lunch. So to me, it's like, oh, I've had my lunch. Now I'm going to go for a run, or at least put my running clothes on. And that will encourage me to get out the door faster. So for reading, have your book downstairs with your coffee, leave it there. Or maybe have your book on your phone. Maybe that's the first app that you open in the morning, and start to retrain your brain that when I'm drinking my coffee, I'm also reading my book in the morning. Or some other pairing that might work for you. Maybe it's listening to an audiobook while you fold clothes. Maybe it's going for your walk because you work from home and you're going for your walk to get outside so you're not sitting at your desk all day. And on that walk, you're listening to your book. Start to pair some activities together, and that will help you increase your minutes, if that's your reading goal, of course. Revisit your idea of sharing. Like maybe the idea of telling people that you're super into science fiction doesn't sound all that great to you. Well, it doesn't have to be some broadcasted Instagram post. You can share what you're interested in reading with a neighbor. You can share it with your kids. You can share it with friends. It doesn't have to be broadcasted on whatever social media channels you have. Maybe the social media channels make it feel less daunting. Maybe you follow a bookstagrammer, or maybe you follow an author and you can let them know what you're reading. Maybe that's the way you share, is by letting the author of a book that you just finished know that you've read it, know that you liked it. Don't let them know you didn't like it. If you didn't like it, don't say anything. That is a cardinal rule. They're getting enough reviews in this world, especially, than they probably need. So if you didn't like it, just let it go by the wayside. But if you did like it, let them know. It's a great way to connect. And that's the magic of social media, is that you can connect with these authors that used to feel like came out of the ether, and now you know what they ate for breakfast. One of my favorite exchanges was after I read Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders, whom I love George Saunders' work, but this particular book really touched me. And he has a Substack now, but at the time he didn't have any social media channels. So I looked up his email address. He is a creative writing professor at Syracuse. And I wrote to him and I just said how much his book meant to me. And I really loved it and love his style and thank you so much. And I got a wonderful, beautiful letter back from him. And it's something that I treasure now. It's one of my most treasured possessions. And I had to print it out because just having an email didn't seem real. But that's another story for another day, is what's happening to all the writing ephemera, the letters that we used to have. I have an entire book of Van Gogh's letters. Like, what's going to happen? Is it just going to be emails that they find? I don't know. But another story for another day. So I encourage you to revisit your idea of sharing and see if you can tweak it a little bit in these last 4 months to work for you, or to feel more meaningful, if just making some random post like I finished this book on Instagram isn't for you. So if book clubs were a part of your resolution, maybe it seemed like you couldn't find one, or maybe it seems like your book club, they don't really want to read. They just want to have their glass of wine and gossip, which is all good too. But, you can also make a book club a meeting with yourself. You can reframe the idea of book club. You can say, I'm making this commitment that once a week, I'm going to talk to somebody about the book I'm reading. And it doesn't have to be some orchestrated event where it's themed and there's dinner. It can just be, I'm at lunch with my husband or my friend or my daughter, and I'm saying to her, this is the book I'm reading. I'm really interested in it. Or I don't really like it that much and I don't know why. A book club doesn't have to be this magical place where every month you're meeting and you have cocktails that match the book title and you're dressing like Virginia Woolf or whatever it is. It can just be that you're meeting with someone and your book is going to be part of the conversation. Now, of course, if you want to start one of those awesome book clubs where it is like they're inviting the author to come or they're watching a film and then reading the book, do it. I mean, it is a way to create community in a world that is increasingly more difficult to be in person with things. But my friends and I've talked about this on the podcast before, we do Zoom meetings about books. I send books as gifts and then say, hey, let's make a wine date to talk about this, as a way of giving the gift to myself. So I've given the gift of the book to a friend, but I'm giving also a gift to myself about having a date on the books with this person that I care about, where we do discuss things that I love and hopefully that they love too, because I try to be really thoughtful about picking books for people. Now, decluttering, let's talk about that. We have a lot of tips from last week, but the number one tip is if space determines the number. So if you only have 3 bookshelves, you're not going to be able to house 4 bookshelves worth of books. So let the space dictate how many you keep and start there. And once you have the space dictated, then you can move on to some of the other things that we talked about in last week's episode. For example, starting with books you would absolutely never give away in a million years, and then going down from there. And you'll be surprised. And at the very least, for the people who are out there who are listening, who are young, get rid of your textbooks. You're never going to look at them again. The number 6 is to read 2 books by the same author. So if you wanted to do a deep dive and you thought it was going to be your summer of Baudelaire, like Mason Curry just had, or your summer of Proust, like Gretchen Rubin has had in the past, it doesn't have to be that deep. You don't have to read all 16 volumes. Like, pick 2. You really loved Handmaid's Tale, so Margaret Atwood's backlist is huge. Pick 1. Pick a book of poems. You'll get through it in an hour. Pick a book of short stories. Do something small so that you are staying true to your goal, which is to do a deep dive, but it's not to be a completionist and to do the whole thing. And you'll be surprised that you do get so much insight into an author when you read their backstock, because you can see what themes repeat. You can see how they've changed, or how the world has changed, or how writing has changed. And that just deepens your understanding of your own life and your own art and your own way of seeing the world. And you realize that this person has continued to put themselves out there in the world and continued to create in the midst of all of this time where it isn't easy to do. And it just gives you an appreciation for their energy, their curiosity, and their desires in a way that just reading one book makes it feel like anyone can do it. I would say if you're trying to increase your nonfiction writing, to really focus on your topic. Like, don't just read the number 1 bestseller nonfiction, the Anxious Kids book that's out right now that I know I should read, The Anxious Generation, and I probably will read. But instead, pick something that speaks to you. My next nonfiction read that's sitting on my night table right now is Nick Hornsby's book about Dickens and Prince and how they are very similar types of geniuses. I can't wait. That is right up my street. So I'm excited for that book. Now, I have lots of other books that feel like shoulds, but that's not one of them. So nonfiction can sometimes feel like a big should. I should read that book on climate change. I should read the latest political memoir. I should. Don't should. Find your topic. Pick it. Select it. If you're a gardener, if you're a musician, if you love food, there's a million books on every topic. Find one that's interesting to you and read that one. Don't read the one that everybody tells you need to read if you want to be a good parent or a good businessman or a good whatever. Just pick the topic that interests you. And the last thing I'll say is if you're trying to increase your reading habits, go to the library. Go to your library. See what attracts you on the shelves. See what the librarians recommend. See what people are reading. It's amazing. It feels like kismet sometimes when I walk through the library and I pick out books that I would never pick out at a bookstore, that I would never borrow from a friend, because I probably didn't even know they existed, and 2, because they generally speak to my hobbies more in this part of my life. I have plenty of novels on my to-be-read pile. I have plenty of nonfiction as well. So I'm not always looking for those in the library, but what I do pick up is like books like Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain, or I picked up recently a book it's about a picture book writing for kids. And I read a wonderful book called Finding the Magic Words about writing for children, but this was one that I never heard of. It was older, like from the 70s, and I just grabbed it off the shelf, and it's been great. It's been a great read. So it's just really interesting to me that it can feel like the right book finds you at the library. And of course, librarians are always there to help, and they are the original search engine. And if you want helps and you want to say, hey, I really love book X and book Y, and I don't know what I want to read next, they're going to have a million ideas for you. And if it's not at your local library, because maybe yours is pretty small, they will get it for you. They will find it. So you can do it. I firmly believe you can get this done by the end of 2024, whatever your reading goals are. But take this opportunity and take this podcast episode as a sign to reignite your reading resolutions, to get ready. Use the reading guide, the fall reading guide, if you need a place to start, and shape your 2025 now. Get the momentum going so that you can have new goals for 2025 instead of feeling like, wow, I wanted to read more in 2024 and I didn't really know how to do that. So hopefully this podcast gave you some ideas for that. And as always, be well, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening to The Literary Sipper. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. If you did, please subscribe and leave a rating and review if you're feeling especially generous. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep putting your voice in the world. It's waiting for you.